Robert Preston walked through his mansion's marble halls, barely noticing the expensive paintings that lined the walls. At 65, he had everything money could buy, but today, something was very wrong. His hands were shaking as he dialed his lawyer's number for the third time. "James, the suitcase is gone. $100,000 just vanished." His voice echoed through the empty house. "I had it right here in my office last night. I was going to take it to the bank this morning." The lawyer's calm voice did little to settle his nerves. "Mr. Preston, have you called the police?" No police." Robert ran his fingers through his silver hair. "The money was supposed to be off the books, you know that." He hung up and sank into his leather chair, the weight of his situation crushing down on him. The suitcase wasn't just filled with cash, it held the key to closing the biggest deal of his career. Without it, everything could fall apart. His eyes fell on the cleaning schedule posted on his desk. Rosa Martinez would be coming today. Rosa had worked for him for 15 years, keeping his massive home spotless. She was the only person besides him who had access to every room, including his private office. The thought made his stomach turn. Rosa had always been honest, hard-working, quiet. She raised her 3 kids alone after her husband died, never complained, never asked for advances on her salary. But $100,000 could tempt anyone. The doorbell rang exactly at 9, like every Tuesday. Rosa stood there in her usual navy dress, her black hair pulled back in a neat bun. Her dark eyes met his, and for a moment, Robert thought he saw something different in them. "Good morning, Mr. Preston," she said, clutching her worn purse closer to her chest. "May I speak with you before I start working?" Robert's heart pounded. "Come into my office, Rosa." They sat across from each other, the mahogany desk between them like a barrier. Rosa's hands trembled as she opened her purse. Robert held his breath. She pulled out a familiar black suitcase. "I found this last night when I was cleaning. I didn't open it at first, but it fell and—" Her voice trailed off. Robert stared at the suitcase, relief flooding through him, but Rosa wasn't finished. "There's something I need to tell you, Mr. Preston." She straightened her back, looking more determined than he'd ever seen her. "I know what's in this suitcase, and I know it's not legal money." The air in the room seemed to freeze. Robert's relief turned to ice in his veins. "I've worked for you. For 15 years, Rosa continued. "I've seen things, heard things, I never said anything, but now—" She took a deep breath. "I want to make a deal." Robert's fingers gripped the arms of his chair. "A deal?" "My son Miguel, he's brilliant. He got accepted to Harvard Medical School, but we can't afford it, even with scholarships." Rosa's eyes filled with tears, but her voice stayed steady. "I want you to pay for his education. All of it." Robert's mind raced. Medical school would cost hundreds of thousands. But if word got out about the money, about where it came from— "Why should I trust you?" he asked. Rosa placed the suitcase on his desk. "Because I could have disappeared with this money last night. I could have changed our lives forever. Instead, I'm here, making an honest deal. You help my son become a doctor, and I keep being the same loyal housekeeper I've always been." Robert looked at Rosa, really looked at her, for the first time in 15 years. He saw the calluses on her hands from years of cleaning, the dignity in her posture, the hope and fear fighting in her eyes. "You've thought about this," he said slowly, "all night." Rosa's hands were steady now. "I know it's a lot to ask, but Miguel, he could help so many people as a doctor. Isn't that worth more than what's in this suitcase?" The morning sun streamed through the office windows, casting long shadows across the floor. Robert reached for the suitcase, opened it, counted. The money. Every dollar was there, neatly stacked, waiting. His world had tilted on its axis. The woman he'd barely noticed for 15 years held his fate in her hands. And she wasn't asking for the money. She was asking for a future, for her son, for something bigger than both of them. Robert closed the suitcase and looked at Rosa. In that moment, he saw more than his housekeeper. He saw a mother fighting for her child's dreams. He saw someone who chose honesty when dishonesty would have been easier. He saw a strength he wished he had. "Tell me about Miguel," he said finally. "Tell me everything." "About this boy who wants to be a doctor." Rosa's smile broke through like sunshine after rain. As she began to talk about her son, Robert realized that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't just about saving himself from scandal. Maybe it was about something more. Something that all his millions had never bought him. Redemption. Rosa's hands shook as she drove her old Toyota Corolla home that evening. The streets of the wealthy neighborhood where she worked faded into the more modest area where she lived. Her small house, with its peeling paint and crooked mailbox, looked even smaller than usual. Miguel was waiting at the kitchen table, surrounded by college brochures and scholarship letters. At 18, he looked so much like his late father that it made Rosa's heart ache. His dark eyes lit up when she walked in. "Mom, I didn't expect you home so early." He quickly tried to hide a rejection letter under the pile of papers. "I saw that," Rosa said, sitting down heavily in the chair across from him. "Another scholarship said no." Miguel's shoulders slumped. "They said I'm qualified, but there just isn't enough funding. Maybe I should wait a year, try to save up money." "No." Rosa reached across the table and took his hand. "Miguel, something happened today, something that's going to change everything." As she told him about Mr. Preston and the deal she'd made, Miguel's expression changed from confusion to shock to worry. "Mom, that money, it sounds dangerous. What if you get in trouble?" "I've cleaned that house for 15 years, Rosa said firmly. "I know things about Mr. Preston that could ruin him. But I also know he's not an evil man, just complicated. And now he's going to help you become a doctor." But even as she reassured her son, doubt crept into Rosa's mind. She hadn't told Miguel everything, like how she'd seen Mr. Preston meeting with strange men late at night, or the suspicious phone calls she'd overheard while cleaning. The suitcase full of money was just the tip of the iceberg. Across town, in his luxurious penthouse office, Robert Preston was having his own crisis of conscience. His business partner, Victor Kane, paced the room like a caged tiger. "You did what?" Victor's face was red with anger. "You're going to pay for some maid's kid to go to medical school. Have you lost your mind, Robert?" "She found the money, Victor. She could have taken it and run. Instead, she brought it back." Victor slammed his hand on the desk. "She's blackmailing you. We should fire her, threaten her with theft charges if she talks." "No." Robert's voice was firm. "I made a deal. And maybe it's time we started doing things differently." Victor's eyes narrowed. "Different? Our whole empire is built on doing things our way. The money laundering, the offshore accounts, the bribes, it's all connected. You start pulling one thread, and the whole thing could unravel. I'm tired." "Victor, tired of looking over my shoulder, tired of deals made in shadows." Robert walked to the window, looking out at the city lights. "This maid, Rosa, she showed me something today, integrity. Real integrity, not the fake kind we pretend to have." "You're becoming soft," Victor spat. "What's next? Will you confess all our sins to the FBI?" "Of course not. But Miguel's education, that's something good we can do, something real." Victor grabbed his coat. "I need time to think. Don't do anything stupid, Robert. Remember, if you go down, we all go down." After Victor left, Robert poured himself a drink and thought about Rosa. There was something about her quiet strength that had shaken him to his core. For the first time in years, he felt something he'd almost forgotten: hope. Meanwhile, in another part of town, Rosa's daughter Carmen was serving tables at the diner where she worked. At 22, she was the spitting image of Rosa in her youth, but with a harder edge. When she heard about what happened with the suitcase, her reaction was very different from Miguel's. "Mom, this is our chance," Carmen said during her break, keeping her voice low. "Think about it. He must have more money hidden away. If we play this..." "Right." "No." Rosa cut her off. "This isn't about getting rich, Carmen. It's about Miguel's future, about doing the right thing." Carmen laughed bitterly. "The right thing? Where was the right thing when Dad died, and we could barely afford the funeral? Where was it when I had to drop out of community college to help pay the bills?" Rosa felt the old guilt rising up. Carmen had given up so much to help the family after her father's death. She'd always been the practical one, the survivor. "I know life hasn't been fair," Rosa said softly, "but this is our chance to change things the right way. Mr. Preston is going to help Miguel, and maybe what? He'll suddenly grow a conscience and help all of us." Carmen shook her head. "You're being naive, Mom. Rich people like him. They don't change. They just get better at pretending." As Rosa drove home that night, her daughter's words echoed in her head. She thought about the suitcase, about Mr. Preston's secrets, about Victor Kane's expensive car that she'd seen leaving the mansion. She thought about Miguel's dreams and Carmen's bitterness. She'd made a deal with the devil to save her son's future. But as she pulled into her driveway, seeing Miguel's light still on as he studied, she knew she'd do it all again. Even if it meant keeping secrets from her own children. Even if it meant walking a dangerous line between right and wrong. Inside, Miguel had fallen asleep at the kitchen table, his face pressed against a Harvard brochure. Rosa gently brushed his hair back, just like she used to do when he was small. "Everything will be okay," she whispered, more to herself than to him. Everything has to be okay. But in her heart, she knew this was just the beginning. The suitcase of money had opened a door that couldn't be closed, and somewhere in the city, Victor Kane was making plans of his own, plans that would test not just Rosa's integrity, but everything she held dear. The morning sun hadn't yet risen when Victor Kane pulled his black Mercedes into the empty parking lot of St. Mary's Church. He checked his watch. 5:30 a.m., right on time. A few minutes later, another car arrived and Carmen stepped out, still wearing her diner uniform. "You're Victor Kane?" she asked, sliding into the passenger seat of his car. "The one who called the diner last night? And you're Rosa Martinez's daughter?" Victor's smile didn't reach his eyes. "We need to talk about your mother and Robert Preston." Carmen's heart raced, but she kept her voice steady. "I'm listening." "Your mother found something that belongs to us. Yes, Preston agreed to pay for your brother's education, but that's just a fraction of what that suitcase means." Victor pulled out an envelope stuffed with cash. "Help us, and there's more where this came from." Meanwhile, at the Preston mansion, Rosa arrived early. She found Robert in his office, looking like he hadn't slept. "Mr. Preston, are you all right?" Robert looked up, his eyes red. "Rosa, sit down, please." He pushed a stack of papers across his desk. "These are the documents for Miguel's education fund. Everything's arranged. Harvard Medical School, living expenses, books. It's all covered." Rosa's hands trembled as she touched the papers. "Thank you, Mr. Preston. I don't know what to say." "Don't thank me yet." Robert's voice was heavy. "Victor Kane came to see me last night. He's not happy about our arrangement." "What does that mean?" "It means you need to be careful. Victor isn't like me. He doesn't believe in second chances or redemption." Robert leaned forward. "Rosa, maybe you should take some time off. Go visit family somewhere far from here." Rosa straightened her back. "I don't run from problems, Mr. Preston. Never have, never will." Across town, Miguel was having breakfast with his girlfriend, Sarah Chen, at their favorite coffee shop. Sarah's father owned a successful chain of restaurants, and she'd never known the kind of hardship Miguel's family faced. "I still can't believe it," Sarah said, stirring her latte. "A complete stranger is paying for your medical school?" Miguel shifted uncomfortably. He hadn't told her the whole truth about the suitcase. "Mr. Preston has known my mom for years. He's not really a stranger. Still, it's like a fairy tale." Sarah squeezed his hand. "I'm so happy for you, Miguel. Now we can both go to Boston. Everything's falling into place." But Miguel couldn't shake the worry in his gut. Last night he'd overheard his sister Carmen on the phone talking in whispers, something about meeting someone, about making things right. Carmen had always been the wild one, the one who thought the world owed her something. At the diner, Carmen counted the money Victor had given her, $5,000 just for keeping an eye on her mother and reporting back to him. It seemed too easy. But Carmen had learned long ago that nothing in life was really easy. She thought about Miguel, about how proud everyone was of their perfect son. No one ever looked at Carmen that way. No one saw how hard she worked, how many dreams she'd given up. Well, now it was her turn to get ahead. Rosa spent the morning cleaning the mansion's many rooms, her mind racing. Every sound made her jump. Was it Victor Kane coming to threaten her? Was it the police? She'd seen too many suspicious meetings in this house, heard too many dangerous conversations. In his office, Robert made a decision. He picked up the phone and dialed a number he'd sworn never to use. "Agent Phillips, this is Robert Preston. I think it's time we talked." The FBI agent on the other end was silent for a moment. "I was wondering if you'd ever call, Mr. Preston. Shall we meet?" "Not yet. I need to protect someone first. A woman named Rosa Martinez and her family. The housekeeper." Agent Phillips sounded surprised. "We know about her. We've been watching your house for months, Preston. We know everything." Robert's blood ran cold. "Everything?" "Almost everything, but we need proof, hard evidence, and we need someone on the inside willing to talk." Before Robert could respond, his office door burst open. Victor Kane stood there, his face twisted with rage. "I knew it." Victor held up his phone, recording. "I knew you'd crack eventually. Try to save your own skin." Robert reached for his desk drawer, where he kept his gun, but Victor was faster. The sound of the gunshot echoed through the mansion. Rosa was dusting the library when she heard it. She ran toward Robert's office, her heart pounding. Through the glass doors, she saw Robert slumped over his desk, blood spreading across his expensive shirt. Victor Kane turned toward her, gun still in hand. But Rosa wasn't alone. Carmen stepped out from behind Victor, her face pale. "Mum, what are you doing here?" "You're supposed to be cleaning upstairs." Victor's eyes darted between mother and daughter. "You know each other." Rosa's world spun as she realized the truth. Her own daughter had been working with Victor Kane. The daughter she'd sacrificed everything for had betrayed her. "Carmen," Rosa's voice broke. "What have you done?" The sound of sirens filled the air. Someone had called the police. Victor grabbed Carmen's arm. "We need to go now!" But Carmen pulled away. For the first time, she saw Victor Kane for what he really was. Not a powerful businessman offering her a way out, but a desperate criminal who just shot a man in cold blood. "Mom," Carmen whispered. "I'm sorry, I didn't know, I didn't think." Rosa pulled her daughter close, shielding her as police cars screeched to a halt outside the mansion. In Robert's office, the phone was still off the hook, Agent Phillips's voice calling out from the other end. The morning sun streamed through the windows, painting the scene in harsh light. Blood on the carpet, a gun on the floor, a mother holding her daughter, and a man who'd tried to change too late lying very still at his desk. In the distance, Miguel was just leaving the coffee shop with Sarah, unaware that his family's world was about to change forever. The fairy tale of his medical school dreams was about to collide with a nightmare none of them could have imagined. The emergency room at St. Vincent's Hospital buzzed with activity as doctors rushed Robert Preston into surgery. Rosa sat in the beige waiting room, her cleaning uniform still spotted with his blood. Carmen huddled next to her, looking smaller and younger than her 22 years. Neither of them spoke. Detective Maria Santos approached them, her badge glinting under the fluorescent lights. "Mrs. Martinez, I need to ask you a few more questions about what happened." Rosa squeezed Carmen's hand before standing up. They walked to a quieter corner of the waiting room. "Victor Kane," Rosa said quietly. "He shot. Mr. Preston, I saw everything." "And your daughter?" Detective Santos glanced at Carmen. "What was her involvement?" Rosa's throat tightened. "She made a mistake. Victor Kane manipulated her. She didn't know what he was planning." Before the detective could respond, Miguel burst through the emergency room doors, still wearing his Harvard Medical School acceptance letter t-shirt that Sarah had made for him. His face went pale when he saw the blood on his mother's uniform. "Mom." "Carmen, what happened?" "Sarah's dad called me, said something about a shooting at the Preston mansion." Detective Santos stepped away, giving the family space. Miguel looked between his mother and sister, confusion turning to understanding, then to horror. "Carmen, what did you do?" he whispered. Carmen couldn't meet his eyes. I thought I was finally going to get my chance." Victor Kane said, "He could help me go back to school, start my own business. He just wanted information about Mom and Mr. Preston. Information that almost got him killed." Miguel's voice rose, drawing stares from other people in the waiting room. "Miguel," Rosa said sharply. "Not here, not now." A doctor approached them, still wearing surgical scrubs. "Mrs. Martinez, Mr. Preston is asking for you." Rosa followed the doctor to the recovery room. Robert Preston lay in the hospital bed, looking pale but alive. The bullet had missed his vital organs. Rosa, his voice was weak. Did they catch Victor? No. He escaped during the chaos. The police are looking for him. Robert tried to sit up but winced in pain. Listen carefully. In my office, behind the painting of the sailboat, there's a safe. The combination is your first day of work at the mansion, month, day, year. Everything's there. Documents, recordings, proof of everything Victor and I did. Rosa's eyes widened. You remembered the exact day I started working for you? A faint smile crossed Robert's face. 15 years ago, the day someone honest walked into my dishonest life. He gripped her hand. Take the evidence to Agent Phillips at the FBI. But first, get your family somewhere safe. Victor won't stop coming after you. Meanwhile, in the hospital parking lot, Sarah Chen paced nervously by her car. She'd driven Miguel to the hospital but couldn't bring herself to go inside. Her father's words echoed in her head. The Martinezes are trouble, he'd said. That family is mixed up in something dangerous. I don't want you involved. Sarah's phone buzzed, a text from her father. Come home now. We need to talk about your future. Inside, Carmen had finally stopped crying. She watched her brother talking quietly with Detective Santos, probably telling her everything he knew. Miguel, the perfect son, doing the right thing as always. He hates me now, Carmen whispered when Rosa returned. Your brother doesn't hate you. Rosa sat between her children. But we need to be honest with each other. No more secrets. What exactly did you tell Victor Kane? Before Carmen could answer, Sarah walked in. Miguel stood up, reaching for her, but she stepped back. I can't do this, Sarah said, her voice shaking. Miguel, I love you, but my father, he knows things about what's happening. He says it's not safe to be involved with your family right now. Miguel felt like he'd been punched in the gut. Sarah, wait. But she was already walking away, her expensive shoes clicking on the hospital floor, leaving Miguel standing there with his torn family. Detective Santos returned with more questions, but Rosa's mind was on the safe in Robert's office. Whatever evidence was in there could bring down Victor Kane, but it could also expose years of illegal activities she'd witnessed but kept quiet about. Rosa's phone rang, an unknown number. She stepped away to answer it. Mrs. Martinez. Victor Kane's voice made her blood run cold. Sorry about the mess today, but this isn't over. I know Robert's still alive, and I know he must have told you about the safe. How did you get this number? Victor laughed. I have friends everywhere. At the hospital, at the police station, even at Harvard Medical School. It would be a shame if something happened to ruin Miguel's bright future. Rosa's hand tightened on the phone. What do you want? The contents of that safe. Bring them to me, and your family stays safe. Miguel goes. To Harvard, Carmen stays out of prison for her role in today's events, and you get to keep playing the loyal housekeeper. And if I go to the FBI instead, then you'll learn what happens when you choose the wrong side. The line went dead. Rosa looked at her children. Miguel, his dreams of medical school now tainted by violence and betrayal. Carmen, her mistakes threatening to destroy everything. And somewhere in the city, Victor Kane waited, holding their futures in his cruel hands. The afternoon sun slanted through the hospital windows, casting long shadows. In his hospital bed, Robert Preston slept fitfully, monitors beeping steadily. And in her hand, Rosa held a decision that would change all their lives forever. Detective Santos watched the Martinez family from across the waiting room, her years of experience telling her there was more to this story. Much more. And somewhere in the city, Sarah Chen sat in her father's expensive car, crying as she deleted Miguel's number from her phone. Knowing her father's connections to Victor Kane meant she could never see him again. Rosa pulled her old Toyota into the empty parking lot of the Preston mansion just as the sun was setting. Yellow police tape fluttered in the evening breeze. She used her key to enter through the service entrance, her heart pounding with every step. The mansion felt different. Now, every shadow seemed to hide a threat. The cleaning supplies she'd left out that morning were still there, a reminder of how quickly life could change. She made her way to Robert's office, trying not to look at the bloodstain on the carpet. The painting of the sailboat hung innocently on the wall. Rosa's hands trembled as she lifted it, revealing the safe behind. She input the combination, EU8 15 EU8, her first day of work. The safe door swung open with a soft click. Inside, she found several USB drives, folders full of documents, and a handwritten letter addressed to her. She was putting everything into her bag when a floorboard creaked behind her. "Hello, Rosa." Sarah Chen's father, James Chen, stepped into the office. "I had a feeling you'd come here tonight." Rosa clutched her bag closer. "Mr. Chen, what are you doing here?" "The same thing as you." He moved closer, his expensive suit out of place in the crime scene. "Looking for evidence, but I'm working for Victor Kane." Meanwhile, at the hospital, Miguel sat by Robert Preston's bed. The older man had asked to speak with him alone. "You remind me of myself at your age," Robert said weakly. "Ambitious, smart, ready to change the world. But I made choices that turned me into someone else, someone who cared more about money than people." Miguel shifted uncomfortably. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because right now your mother is probably at my house, getting evidence that could destroy a lot of powerful people. Including Victor Kane, including James Chen." Miguel's head snapped up. "Sarah's father, what does he have to do with this?" Robert's monitors beeped steadily. "James Chen launders money through his restaurant chain. He's been working with Victor for years. That's why Sarah broke up with you today. Her father made her." At the mansion, Rosa faced James Chen, her mind racing. "How long have you been working with Victor?" "Long enough to know everything about you, Rosa. About Miguel's dreams of becoming a doctor. About Carmen's desperation to prove herself." James smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "My Sarah was never going to end up with your son. Surely you understood that." Rosa thought of Miguel's heartbreak, of Sarah's tears in the hospital. "You forced them apart. I protected my daughter from your mess of a family." James held out his hand. "Now give me what's in that bag." Back at the hospital, Carmen paced the waiting room, unable to sit still. Detective Santos watched her from the nurse's station. "Something's wrong," Carmen said suddenly. "Mum should have called by now." The detective checked her watch. "Your mother went to the mansion. She said she needed to get something from Mr. Preston's office, something important." Carmen's voice shook. "Please, you have to help her." Detective Santos was already reaching for her radio when her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number contained a video, surveillance footage from inside the Preston mansion. Live feed. She could see Rosa Martinez facing off against a well-dressed Asian man. "That's James Chen," Carmen gasped, looking over the detective's shoulder. "Sarah's father." In Robert's hospital room, Miguel was trying to process everything. So all this time, Sarah's family was part of it, Robert finished. "But James Chen is just the tip of the iceberg. The evidence in my safe, and it goes all the way to the mayor's office, to judges, to people who can make anyone disappear." Miguel pulled out his phone. "I'm calling the police." "No!" Robert grabbed his arm with surprising strength. "Victor has people inside the police department. Call Agent Phillips at the FBI. His number is in my phone." But when Miguel reached for Robert's phone on the bedside table, he found it was dead. At the mansion, Rosa took a step back from James Chen. "If you work for Victor, you know what he's capable of. He shot Mr. Preston in cold blood." "And Robert Preston deserved it," James spat. "He was going to betray us all, just like you're betraying us now." "I'm not betraying anyone. I'm protecting my children." James laughed coldly. "By ruining their lives? Miguel can forget about Harvard if you don't give me those files. And Carmen? With her connection to Victor Kane, she'll go to prison for years." Rosa's back hit the wall. She could feel the USB drives and documents pressing against her through the bag. 15 years of secrets. 15 years of looking the other way while cleaning up after powerful men's crimes. "My daughter loved your son," James said, his voice softening. "But love isn't enough in our world, Rosa. Power is what matters. Money is what matters. Give me the evidence, and your children can have both." Outside the mansion, police cars approached silently, their lights off. Detective Santos had called for backup, but she'd been careful about who she contacted. If Victor Kane really had people inside the department, in the hospital parking lot, Carmen jumped into her old Honda, Miguel right behind her. They'd seen the surveillance footage on Detective Santos's phone. They knew their mother was in danger. "This is all my fault," Carmen said as she sped through yellow lights. "I never should have trusted Victor Kane." Miguel gripped the dashboard. "It's all our fault. We all wanted something so badly we couldn't see what was really happening." Back in the mansion, Rosa thought about the moment 15 years ago when she'd first walked through these doors, desperate for work after her husband's death. She thought about all the things she'd seen, all the whispered conversations she'd pretended not to hear. She thought about Miguel's acceptance letter to Harvard, about Carmen's bitter dreams, about Sarah's tears in the hospital. James Chen took another step forward, reaching for her bag. "Make the right choice, Rosa, for your children's sake." The sound of breaking glass downstairs made them both freeze. Someone else was in the mansion. "Mom!" Carmen's voice echoed through the halls. "Mom, where are you?" "Mrs. Martinez," Detective Santos called out. "James Chen, this is the police." James's face hardened. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a gun. "It seems we're out of time for negotiations," he said coldly. Rosa looked at the gun, at the evidence in her bag, at the doorway where she could hear her children's footsteps getting closer. 15 years of cleaning up other people's messes had taught her one thing. Sometimes the right choice was the hardest one to make. She reached into her bag, but not for the evidence. Instead, she pulled out her phone, which had been recording everything since she entered the office. "I made my choice a long time ago," she said, her voice steady. "When I taught my children that honesty matters more than money, that love matters more than power." James Chen's finger tightened on the trigger just as Miguel and Carmen appeared in the doorway. Detective Santos right behind them, her gun drawn. The night air filled with the sound of sirens, and in his hospital bed, Robert Preston opened his eyes, somehow knowing that the truth he'd hidden for so long was finally about to come to light. Time seemed to stop in Robert Preston's office. James Chen's gun pointed at Rosa, Detective Santos's gun pointed at James, and Miguel and Carmen, frozen, in the doorway. The evidence that could destroy so many powerful people sat in Rosa's bag, heavy with secrets. "Drop the gun, Mr. Chen," Detective Santos commanded. "It's over." But James Chen's eyes had the desperate look of a man with nothing left to lose. "You don't understand. If this evidence gets out, everything I built, everything I protected my daughter from, it all falls apart." "Dad?" Sarah's voice came from behind Miguel and Carmen. Everyone turned to see her standing there, her face pale with shock. "Dad, what are you doing?" James's hand trembled. "Sarah, you're supposed to be at home." I followed Miguel and Carmen. Sarah's voice shook. I couldn't just walk away, not without knowing the truth." The sound of footsteps thundered up the mansion's stairs. FBI agents in tactical gear swarmed into the office, led by Agent Phillips. "FBI, everyone down!" In the chaos that followed, several things happened. At once, James Chen dropped his gun, falling to his knees. Sarah ran to him, sobbing. And Victor Kane's voice crackled through James's phone, which had fallen to the floor. Chen, what's happening? Did you get the evidence?" Agent Phillips picked up the phone. "Hello, Victor. This is Agent Phillips from the FBI. We need to talk." The line went dead. Hours later, Rosa sat in an FBI safe house, her children asleep in the next room. The evidence from Robert's safe was spread across the table. Documents showing years of money laundering, bribes and corruption that reached into every corner of the city. "You did the right thing," Agent Phillips said, sorting through the files. "This is enough to bring down Victor Kane's entire operation. James Chen's restaurants, the corrupt police officers, even the mayor's office." Rosa looked at her hands. Hands that had cleaned floors and windows, hands that had comforted her children, hands that now held the power to destroy so many lives. "What about my daughter?" she asked. "Carmen's involvement with Victor Kane, she came forward voluntarily," Agent Phillips assured her. "And her recorded conversations with Kane will help us build our case. She'll have immunity." At the hospital, Robert Preston was giving his official statement to another FBI agent. His nurse, Linda, tried to make him rest, but he insisted on telling. Everything. I started small, he explained. Just a few questionable deals. Then Victor Kane showed me how much more we could make if we didn't play by the rules. Before I knew it, I was in too deep to get out. The agent looked up from his notepad. What changed? Robert smiled weakly. A cleaning lady who returned a suitcase full of money, who reminded me that integrity isn't something you can buy. Across town, in a holding cell, James Chen sat with his head in his hands. Sarah watched him through the glass, Miguel standing supportively beside her. I thought I was protecting you, James said when they entered. Everything I did, all the deals with Victor Kane, it was to give you a better life than I had. Sarah wiped tears from her eyes. By breaking the law, by threatening Miguel's mother, by becoming someone I can't even recognize. Miss Chen, a federal marshal interrupted. Your father is being transferred to federal custody. You'll need to say goodbye. Miguel took Sarah's hand as she hugged her father one last time. James looked, had Miguel over his daughter's shoulder. Take care of her, he said softly. Do better than I did. Meanwhile, Carmen sat in an FBI interview room, telling everything she knew about Victor Kane's operation. Every meeting, every conversation, every detail she'd observed during her brief time as his informant. He liked to meet early in the morning, she explained, usually at St. Mary's Church. He said no one would suspect anything happening there. The FBI agent nodded. And the money he paid you? Carmen pulled out an envelope. $5,000. I never spent it. I wanted to, but I couldn't. Not after I saw what he did to Mr. Preston. In another part of the city, Detective Santos and her team raided Victor Kane's empty mansion. They found his safe open and empty, his computers wiped clean. But on his desk, they found something interesting. A one-way plane ticket to a country with no extradition treaty. He's running, Detective Santos said into her radio. Alert all airports and private airfields. Back at the safe house, Rosa finally allowed herself to rest. The weight of 15 years of secrets had been lifted from her shoulders, but new worries took their place. Agent Phillips had promised protection, new identities if necessary. Miguel's acceptance to Harvard was secure. Robert Preston had made sure of that before everything fell apart. But their old life, their home, their sense of safety, all of that was gone. Rosa looked out the window at the city lights. Somewhere out there, Victor Kane was planning his escape. Somewhere, corrupt officials were destroying evidence and calling their lawyers. And somewhere, honest people were finally getting a chance at justice. Her phone buzzed. A text from Robert Preston. Thank you for teaching me it's never too late to do the right thing. In the next room, she could hear Miguel and Carmen talking softly. Despite everything, they were closer now than they'd been in years. Crisis had torn down the walls between them. Sarah had gone home to pack some things. The FBI wanted her. Family under protection, too, at least until Victor Kane was caught. The agents believed he might try to use her to get to her father. Rosa touched the window glass, cool against her fingers. Dawn was breaking over the city, painting the sky in shades of hope. Whatever came next, she knew one thing for certain. The truth, no matter how dangerous, had set them all free. But in a private airport on the outskirts of the city, Victor Kane boarded a small plane, a briefcase full of cash in his hand. He looked at his phone one last time before turning it off. This isn't over, he muttered, as the plane's engines roared to life. Not by a long shot. 3 weeks had passed since the night at Preston Mansion. Rosa stood in the kitchen of their new apartment, provided by the FBI's witness protection program. The place was smaller than their old house, but it felt safer. Miguel was making breakfast while Carmen applied for jobs online. Mom, have you seen the news? Miguel held up his phone. The headline read, Mayor Thompson resigns amid corruption scandal, Rosa nodded. Every day brought new revelations as the FBI unraveled Victor Kane's network. Judges stepping down, police officers suspended, business executives arrested. The city was going through a massive cleanup. The doorbell rang, making them all jump. Even after 3 weeks, loud noises and unexpected visitors still set them on edge. Agent Phillips stood at the door with Detective Santos. We found him, Detective Santos said without preamble. Victor Kane, he's in Singapore. Can you arrest him? Carmen asked, joining them at the door. Agent Phillips shook his head. No extradition treaty, but we've frozen his accounts. He's trapped there with whatever cash he carried out. At St. Vincent's Hospital, Robert Preston was finally being discharged. The gunshot wound had healed, but he looked older, more tired. His lawyer waited with a wheelchair while a nurse reviewed his discharge instructions. Mr. Preston, the nurse said, you have a visitor. Sarah Chen stood in the doorway, looking uncertain. Can we talk? Robert gestured for his lawyer to give. Them privacy. Sarah sat in the visitor's chair, twisting her hands in her lap. My father wants to make a deal, she said quietly. He's willing to testify against Victor Kane's entire organization. He asked me to talk to you first. Robert leaned back in his hospital bed. Why me? Because you were the only one who tried to make things right. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. Dad says he wants to do what you did, to stop running from the truth. Meanwhile, in Singapore, Victor Kane sat in a luxury hotel room watching his empire crumble on international news. His phone rang. One of the few numbers he still trusted. They got to James Chen, his contact said. He's making a deal. Victor slammed his fist on the desk. That coward. What about the offshore accounts? Frozen. The FBI's Financial Crimes Unit is good. Really good. Victor ended the call and poured himself a drink. The view from his hotel showed Singapore's gleaming skyline, but he felt like a prisoner. His cash wouldn't last forever. Back in the safe, House Rosa received an unexpected call from Linda, Robert's nurse. Mrs. Martinez, Robert's being discharged today, but he's refusing to go to the rehabilitation facility. He says he'll only accept home care if you're the one providing it. Rosa sat down heavily. Me, but I'm just a housekeeper. He says you're the only person he trusts. He's offering triple your old salary. Carmen, who had been listening, touched her mother's arm. Mom, you can't go back there. It's not safe. Actually, Agent Phillips interjected, it might be the safest place for her. We're still watching the mansion, and Robert Preston's cooperation has been invaluable to our investigation. Miguel looked up from his medical textbooks. He'd been studying ahead for Harvard, trying to stay focused on his dreams despite everything. What about my school? He asked. How can Mom move back to the mansion when we're supposed to be in witness? Protection. A plan began to form in Rosa's mind. The mansion has a guest house. It's almost as big as this apartment. Maybe we could all stay there, Carmen finished. I could help Mom with Mr. Preston's care. It would give me a chance to do something good to make up for my mistakes. Agent Phillips checked his phone. Just got word. James Chen signed the plea deal. His testimony will help us track down Victor Kane's hidden assets. Sarah Chen and her mother are being placed in witness protection too. Where? Miguel tried to sound casual, but everyone heard the hope in his voice. Detective Santos smiled. Let's just say Harvard Medical School might have 2 protected witnesses enrolled this fall. Rosa looked around their temporary apartment at the bare walls, the generic furniture, the boxes they hadn't bothered to unpack. Then she thought about the Preston mansion. Despite everything that had happened there, it had been her workplace for 15 years. She knew every corner, every shadow. I'll call Linda back, she decided, but I have conditions. Later that evening, as they packed their few belongings, Carmen found the Harvard acceptance letter that had started everything. It was crumpled, now stained with coffee and tears. Do you ever wonder, she asked Miguel, what would have happened if Mom hadn't found that suitcase? Miguel smoothed out the letter carefully. We'd have our old life, but maybe this new one will be better, more honest. Rosa overheard them as she packed the kitchen supplies the FBI had provided. Her children had grown so much in these 3 weeks, not in size, but in understanding, in strength. Her phone buzzed with a text from Robert. The guest house is ready whenever you are. Thank you for giving me a second chance. Outside, Detective Santos sat in her unmarked car watching the apartment. She'd volunteered for protection duty, wanting to see this case through to the end. Her dashboard computer blinked with an alert. Unusual activity detected on one of Victor Kane's known aliases. He was moving money again somehow. In Singapore, Victor Kane booked a private meeting room at his hotel. One by one, old associates arrived, people who had escaped the FBI's net, people who owed him favors, people who might help him rebuild. But in the Preston Mansion's guest house, Rosa unpacked her family's belongings, setting up their new home. From the window, she could see Robert Preston in his wheelchair on the main house's patio, watching the sunset. Sarah's car pulled up the driveway. She'd be staying in the East Wing with her mother, while her father's trial preparations continued. Miguel hurried out to help with her bags. Carmen arranged fresh flowers in the guest house's kitchen, her first small act of creating beauty instead of chaos. And somewhere in the city, James Chen sat in his cell, writing a letter to his daughter, trying to explain how love could make a person lose their way, and how the truth could help them find it again. Life at the Preston Mansion settled into an unexpected rhythm. Rosa spent her mornings helping Robert with his physical therapy in the mansion's converted gym. Carmen managed his medications and appointments, discovering she had a talent for healthcare organization. Miguel and Sarah studied for their upcoming first semester at Harvard, their books spread across the guest house's living room. "You're getting stronger," Rosa said, as she helped Robert with his walking exercises. The bullet wound had healed, but weeks in the hospital had weakened him. "Thanks to you," Robert smiled, then grimaced as he took another step. "Although sometimes I think you're trying to kill me with these exercises." Rosa adjusted his support belt. "If I wanted to kill you, Mr. Preston, I wouldn't have saved your life that day." They shared a knowing look, remembering the chaos that had brought them here. Outside the window, FBI agents still patrolled the grounds, a constant reminder that danger hadn't passed. In the guest house, Carmen sorted through the morning mail. A letter caught her eye, no return address, postmarked from Singapore. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was a single playing card, the Queen of Hearts. On it, written in familiar handwriting, "Miss our early morning meetings." Carmen dropped the card like it was on fire. Victor Kane was sending her a message. Sarah found her sitting there staring at the card. "Carmen, what's wrong?" "He knows where we are," Carmen whispered. "He's letting us know he hasn't forgotten." Sarah picked up the card carefully with a tissue. "We need to tell Agent Phillips." But Carmen grabbed her arm. "Wait, maybe we can use this. Set a trap." Sarah's eyes widened. "That's dangerous." So is waiting for him to make the first move. In Singapore, Victor Kane sat in his hotel's rooftop bar, watching the sunset with a beautiful woman. Lisa Wong, daughter of a powerful Chinese banking family, laughed at his jokes and touched his arm flirtatiously. "Such a shame about your legal troubles back home," she said, sipping her champagne. "But perhaps they're an opportunity in disguise." Victor raised an eyebrow. "How so?" "My family's banks have experience with complicated situations, and we're always looking for strategic partners." Meanwhile, Detective Santos sat in her office, reviewing security footage from the mansion. Something about the mail delivery had caught her eye. The regular mailman was on vacation. His replacement had lingered too long at the guest house's mailbox. Her phone rang. It was James Chen, calling from federal custody. "Detective, we have a problem," he said without preamble. "Victor Kane's been contacting people, calling in favors. He's planning something big." "How do you know?" "Because he tried to contact me through my old networks. He's looking for someone close to the Martinezes, someone who can get past the FBI's security." In the mansion's study, Robert worked on his laptop while Rosa dusted the bookshelves. Old habits died hard, even though she was technically his. Nurse now, she still found herself cleaning when she was worried. "Rosa," Robert said suddenly, "come look at this." On his screen was a financial report, transactions from one of Victor Kane's known shell companies. "He's moving money again," Robert explained. "But look at the pattern. It's the same one we used. To use for what? For hiring specialists, people who could solve problems." Rosa's hand went to her throat. "You mean he's hiring someone to come after us?" In the guest house, Miguel and Sarah took a break from studying. They sat on the patio, watching the sunset, trying to pretend they were just two normal college students in love. "Sometimes I forget," Sarah said, leaning against him. about everything that happened, about my father in jail, about Victor Kane. Then something reminds me, and it all comes crashing back. Miguel squeezed her hand. We'll have a new life in Boston, away from all this. Will we? Sarah sat up. Miguel, I need to tell you something. Harvard. It wasn't just your dreams that brought me there. The FBI thinks Victor Kane has connections in Boston. They want us there because we might be bait, Miguel finished. I know. Agent Phillips told me last week. Inside the main house, Carmen helped Robert into bed for the night. As, she adjusted his pillows, he caught her arm. You got something in the mail today, he said. Something that scared you. Carmen stepped back. How did you? Because I used to work with Victor Kane. I know how he thinks. He likes to play with people before he strikes. I can handle it. Robert's face softened. Like you handled being his informant? Carmen's eyes filled with tears. I'm trying to make up for that. I know. That's why I'm going to help you set a trap for him. Late that night, Rosa couldn't sleep. She walked through the guest house checking on her children. Miguel had fallen asleep on his books. Carmen's bed was empty. She was probably still. In the main house, talking with Robert, a noise outside made her freeze. Through the window, she saw a figure moving near the gates. She reached for her phone to call the FBI agents, but then she recognized Sarah sneaking back from a late-night call with her father. Rosa watched the girl hurry inside, and her heart ached. They were all carrying such heavy burdens. Sarah torn between loyalty to her father and her love for Miguel, Carmen trying to redeem herself, Miguel carrying the weight of everyone's sacrifices. Her phone buzzed. A text. From Detective Santos, need to talk. First thing tomorrow, don't tell anyone. In Singapore, Victor Kane ended his date with Lisa Wong with a kiss. Back in his hotel room, he opened his laptop. On the screen was a detailed schedule of the FBI patrols at Preston Mansion, the access. Codes to the gate and something even more valuable. The name of someone inside the protection detail who was willing to look the other way. Time to go home, he whispered, booking a private flight to a small airfield just outside the city. In the mansion's security room, Agent Phillips watched the monitors, unaware that one of his own team was sending information to the very man they were protecting everyone from. And in her small room in the guest house, Carmen held the Queen of Hearts playing card over a candle flame, watching it burn. She'd made her choice. No more running, no more hiding. The trap was set. Now they just had to wait for Victor Kane to take the bait. The morning sun hadn't yet risen when Detective Santos pulled up to the Preston Mansion's service entrance. Rosa was already waiting, a cup of coffee growing cold in her hands. We found the mole, the detective said without greeting. Agent Thompson. He's been feeding information to Victor Kane for weeks. Rosa's coffee cup slipped from her fingers, shattering on the ground. Thompson? But he's in charge of the night patrol. He has access to everything. Exactly. And last night he disappeared, along with all the security codes and patrol schedules. Inside the main house, Robert Preston sat in his study, reviewing the latest report from his private investigator. Lisa Wong's photo stared back at him from the screen. I should have known, he muttered. Victor always had a weakness for powerful women. Carmen entered with his morning medications. What did you find? Victor's new girlfriend. She's not just any banker's daughter. Her family has been helping him move money, set up new identities. Robert looked up at Carmen. He's coming back, soon. Meanwhile, in a private airfield outside Singapore, Victor Kane boarded a small jet. Lisa Wong kissed him goodbye, slipping a USB drive into his pocket. Everything you need is there, she whispered. Security codes, schedules, building plans. Make them pay for what they did to you. Victor smiled, but his eyes were cold. Don't worry, my dear, everyone will get exactly what they deserve. In the guest house, Miguel and Sarah packed for their move to Boston. Harvard's fall semester would start in 2 weeks. Maybe we should stay, Miguel said, folding a sweater. With everything that's happening, Sarah touched his arm. We can't put our lives on hold forever. Mom and Carmen will have the FBI's protection. And Detective Santos said we might be safer in Boston, away from everything. But what if Victor Kane, as that's exactly why we need to go. We're part of the plan, remember? Their conversation was interrupted by Agent Phillips, who burst into the room looking worried. "Pack faster," he ordered. "We need to move you two tonight. Thompson's betrayal changes everything." Upstairs in the main house, Rosa helped Robert with his morning exercises. His strength was returning, but he still needed support. "I never thanked you properly," he said as they took a break. "Not just for saving my life, but for showing me another way to live." Rosa adjusted his walking support. "You gave my son a future. You protected my daughter when she made mistakes. We're even." "No," Robert shook his head. "We're family, and family protects each other." In federal custody, James Chen paced his cell. He'd been trying to call Sarah all morning, but the calls wouldn't go through. "Something's wrong," he told his guard. "I need to speak to Agent Phillips now. Victor Kane's making his move." But the guard just shrugged. "Phone systems are down for maintenance." James sank onto his bed, his heart racing. The guard was lying, he could tell, which meant, "They've already started," he whispered. Detective Santos arrived at her office to find her computer locked. When she called IT, they said her access had been revoked. Due to a security protocol. "On whose orders?" she demanded. "Agent Thompson's. Last night, her blood ran cold." Thompson hadn't just stolen information. He was actively disrupting their operations. Back at the mansion, Carmen found another playing card in the mail. This time, it was the King of Hearts. The message was clear. The Queen had found her king, and they were coming home. She took the card to Robert's study where he and Rosa were reviewing security footage. "Look at this." Robert pointed to the screen. A delivery truck had been parked outside the gates for over an hour. "That's not normal." Rosa squinted at the image. "The logo, I've seen it before. On papers in Victor's office when I used to clean there." "It's one of his shell companies," Robert confirmed. "They're watching us." In Boston, a realtor showed a lovely apartment to a young couple. The paperwork said they were Mr. and Mrs. Thompson. "Perfect for students," she said cheerfully, "and very secure. The building has 24-hour surveillance." Victor Kane smiled at the realtor. "Security is very important to us." His companion, a young woman who looked remarkably like Sarah Chen from certain angles, nodded in agreement. Back at the mansion, Agent Phillips gathered everyone in the main house's living room. "We've lost contact with our Boston team," he announced, "and our backup security protocols have been compromised. We need to move you all to a new safe house tonight." "No," Robert said firmly. "We're not running." Carmen stood up. "He's right. Running is what Victor Kane expects. It's what he wants." "You don't understand," Agent Phillips argued. "With Thompson's betrayal, this location isn't safe anymore." "Nowhere is safe," Rosa said quietly. "As long as Victor Kane is out there, we'll always be looking over our shoulders. Unless we end this," Robert finished. "Here, on our terms." Sarah gripped Miguel's hand. "What about Boston?" "That was never really the plan, was it?" Miguel looked at Agent Phillips. "You were using us as bait, letting Victor think we'd be vulnerable there." The FBI agent sighed. "We needed him to make a move, to come out of hiding." "Well, he's making his move." Carmen held up the King of Hearts card. "But not in Boston. He's coming here." Detective Santos burst into the room. "My police access has been revoked. Thompson's locked down all our communication channels. We're on our own." Robert wheeled himself to the window. The delivery truck was still there watching. "Good," he said. "Let them watch. Let them think they have us trapped." Rosa looked at her children. Miguel, who had given up a normal college experience to help trap a criminal. Carmen, who had turned her mistake into strength. And Sarah, who chose love over family loyalty. "What's the plan?" she asked Robert. He smiled, and for a moment she saw the shrewd businessman he used to be, but tempered now with something new. Wisdom, maybe, or redemption. Victor Kane thinks he knows. This house knows us. But he's about to learn that everything has changed, starting with the people he thought he could control. Outside, the sun set over the mansion. The delivery truck's engine started, its surveillance shift ending, another beginning. In his private jet somewhere over the Pacific, Victor Kane studied building plans and security codes, unaware that he was flying into a trap, and in Robert's study they gathered to plan their last stand. Not as victims or witnesses, but as a family forged in secrets and sacrifice, in betrayal and redemption. The final game was about to begin. The Preston mansion stood dark against the night sky. From the outside, it looked deserted. No lights, no movement, no signs of the FBI protection that had guarded it for weeks. The perfect target. Victor Kane watched from the delivery truck, his expensive suit replaced by tactical gear. Beside him, Agent Thompson checked his weapon. "All the security systems are disabled," Thompson reported. "No response from the FBI. Teams, when I called in the evacuation order, they must have run." Victor smiled coldly. Cowards. Always. Running. Inside the mansion, Robert Preston sat in his wheelchair in the darkened study, Rosa standing beside him. They watched through the security cameras as Victor's team approached the gates. 5 men, Rosa counted, plus Thompson. "Just like old times," Robert said quietly. Victor always liked a small team for personal revenge. In the guest house, Carmen helped Miguel and Sarah into bulletproof vests, courtesy of Detective Santos's SWAT connections. "Remember the plan," Carmen whispered. "No heroes, no risks." Sarah checked her phone one last time. A message from her father in federal custody. "Stay safe, I love you." Detective Santos crouched in the mansion's wine cellar with 3 trusted officers. They'd entered through the old tunnel system Robert had shown them, a remnant from Prohibition days that wasn't on any official plans. "Team 2 in position," she radioed softly. Agent Phillips responded from his position in the attic. "Team 1 ready." Victor Kane's team reached the front door. No alarms, no lights, no response. Thompson entered his old security code, and the door clicked open. "Too easy," Victor muttered, but his desire for revenge overpowered his caution. "Martinez. Family first, then Preston." They moved through the dark house like shadows, weapons ready. Thompson led them toward the guest house. "Wait," Victor held up his hand. "Preston's study, I want to check something." The study door was closed. Victor nodded to Thompson, who kicked it open. Robert sat there in his wheelchair, silhouetted against the window. "Welcome home, Victor," he said calmly. Victor raised his gun. "You're supposed to be running." "I'm done running." Robert's voice was steady. "We all are." Victor laughed. "We? You mean your little family of witnesses? The maid and her criminal daughter. Your empire is gone, Robert. Your money, your power. I'm taking it all back." "You still don't understand." Robert wheeled himself forward. It was never about the money. Suddenly the lights blazed on. Victor spun around to find Detective Santos and her team emerging from hidden positions, weapons drawn. "FBI, drop your weapons." But Victor was too quick. He grabbed Robert from the wheelchair, using him as a shield. "Back off," he shouted, "or the cripple dies." "That's your problem, Victor," Rosa's voice came from behind a bookshelf. "You never paid attention to the help." She stepped out, holding her familiar black suitcase. Victor's eyes went wide. "The money?" "No." Rosa opened the case, revealing recording equipment. The truth. Every conversation, every deal, every crime, recorded over 15 years of cleaning your office. And backed up to federal servers, Agent Phillips added, appearing in the doorway. Victor's men began to lower their weapons, but Thompson made a desperate move. He grabbed Rosa, pressing his gun to her head. "Nobody move, Mum!" Carmen's voice rang out. Victor smiled. "Ah, the prodigal daughter. Come to watch your mother die like I watched my empire fall." But Carmen wasn't looking at Victor. She was looking past him at Sarah Chen, who had slipped into the room through a servant's entrance. Sarah held up her phone. "Hi, Dad. Are you getting all this?" On the screen, James Chen's face was grim. He was surrounded by federal agents, live streaming, everything. "I'm not just getting it," James said. "Every law enforcement agency in the country is watching, including the Singapore authorities, who are very interested in your new girlfriend's family bank." Victor's grip on Robert loosened slightly. "You're bluffing." "No bluff," Miguel stepped into view, holding a laptop. "Sarah's father gave up everything. Accounts, contacts, evidence. Even your private airfield landing permits for tonight." Thompson's hand trembled. "Victor, what do we do?" But Victor Kane wasn't listening. He was looking at Robert Preston, seeing for the first time not a weak, wounded man in a wheelchair, but someone who had found strength in redemption. "It's over, Victor." Robert said softly. Let it go. For a moment, no one moved. Then Thompson's gun clattered to the floor. He released Rosa, falling to his knees. Victor made one last desperate move, turning his gun towards Sarah. But before he could fire, Carmen tackled him from behind. They crashed into Robert's desk as Detective Santos and her team swarmed in. Rosa ran to Carmen, helping her up. Miguel and Sarah hugged tearfully. Agent Phillips read Victor his rights while Detective Santos handcuffed Thompson. You think this is the end? Victor spat as they led him away. You think you're safe? There will always be someone else, someone willing to pay for revenge. Maybe, Robert wheeled over to him. But there will always be someone willing to stand up to them. Someone willing to choose right over easy. Hours later, as the sun rose over the mansion, they gathered in the kitchen. Rosa made coffee while Carmen bandaged the cuts she'd gotten tackling Victor. Miguel and Sarah sat close together, exhausted but relieved. So, Agent Phillips said, about Harvard. We're still going, Miguel announced, but not as bait, just as students. Sarah nodded. Normal students. Normal might be boring after all this, Carmen teased. Boring sounds perfect. Rosa smiled, serving coffee in the fancy cups she'd once only been allowed to wash. Robert watched them from the doorway. This unlikely family brought together by a single choice, a single moment of honesty with a suitcase. Full of money. You know, he said, the guest house is yours for as long as you want it, all of you. Rosa looked at her children, Miguel and Sarah planning their future, Carmen discovering her own strength. She thought about the long road that had brought them here, from cleaning floors to saving lives, from keeping secrets to revealing truth. Thank you, she said simply, for everything. Outside, Detective Santos watched the sunrise from the mansion's garden. Her phone buzzed with news updates. Victor Kane arrested. FBI uncovers international banking scandal. Corrupt agent and crime boss face life sentences. But the real story she knew wasn't in the headlines. It was here in this house, where a housekeeper's honesty had changed not just her own life, but had given everyone a chance at redemption. In federal custody, James Chen saw the news of Victor's arrest. He wrote 2 letters, one to the prosecutors detailing everything he knew, and one to his daughter telling her how proud he was of the woman she had become. And in the Preston Mansion's kitchen, life began again. Miguel studied his medical texts while Sarah read law books. She'd decided to follow a new dream. Carmen talked about nursing school, about using her experiences to help others. Rosa cleaned the coffee cups, not because she had to, but because old habits die hard. Robert worked on his physical therapy, growing stronger each day. They had everything they needed, not in bank accounts or secret deals, but in the family they had built, in the truth they had chosen, in the love that had given them the courage to stand together. Outside, the morning sun lit up the mansion's windows, turning them to gold. The reporters would come soon, wanting statements about Victor Kane's arrest. But for now, in this quiet moment, they were just a family having breakfast, sharing coffee and hope, and the promise of a future built on honesty. Rosa looked around, the table at her children, at Robert, at Detective Santos coming in for another cup of coffee. This was her real fortune, she realized, not in suitcases full of money, but in moments full of love, and that was something no one could ever steal.